we're going to welcome on stage 5 exceptional human beings that have agreed to be part of this event. The panel discussion will be moderated by Alice Twait, I hope I pronounced your last name correctly, who is a technology ethicist and philosopher and head of ethics at Omnicom Media Group. We also have Hamza Ben Haj Amar, who is a sustainable AI engineer at Itemis AG Group. Jordan Lowen Collin, a professor in AI ethics and data justice, at Queen's University. Here you're a fellow and a professor at the same time. Amazing. And then we have Artur Yantsenko, who is the Director of Data Engineering at Urban Sports Club, and Maria Sultz, who is the PhD researcher and also CEO of Emium Consulting. So we have a lot of different perspectives now on the table, from engineers, professors, people working in ethics, people working in academia, people working in politics, policy, and philosophers. So I can't wait to hear this discussion and see how we're gonna land home with what was discussed before. So thank you very much.
What's up, Berlin? It feels like I know most of you here now, so it kind of feels weird to be addressing everyone on a stage like this. I'm the facilitator today. Just a small anecdote before we start. When I owned a technology ethics consultancy, I would speak to UX designers, developers, all sorts of people, and they'd be like, this is great. We understand that bias is a problem. We understand, obviously that bit's not great, but like, we understand that bias is a problem. We understand fairness is a problem. My managers do not care, Like, how do I actually do anything about this, right? And that's what I think this panel is about, really, is what we want to do is to inspire and empower you with some strategies to start thinking about ethics a little bit more seriously in your development. So it isn't just a conversation that you're having on the sideline. It turns into something which is fundamental to the design of your technology product. And you might be having that already. I actually don't really know of any group that does it to the highest standard that is envisioned at the moment. So there's always ways that you can improve. But that's what we're going to be talking about today, is some of like the implementation side of it. So I am just going to crack on with the questions. We've had a small introduction, but please do, if you want to fill in the reason why you've got to where you've got to as part of these initial questions, then please do. Maria, can you talk about the organizational structure that you need in order to implement ethics effectively in a large organization? So what kind of structures do you need to make that happen?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for this question. And as you can see, I'm a PhD researcher in regulation and governance of artificial intelligence, but I'm also a company owner where we consult companies of every size, actually, when it comes to IT implementations. And IT now means also artificial intelligence. And what I see, especially in the larger organizations, like I kind of, compared to the smaller enterprises, whatever I'm doing the research on, I see that in the companies happening already at some points, right? Because these larger organizations, they have the people, they have the money, and they are part of the political and governmental debate already prior to all these governmental and regulatory rules that we are applying. But still, having said that and having everything actually there in the organization, companies still struggle. Because if you implement a process, you need to do it end to end. You need to do it from the CEO till the working bees, right, who will do the implementation. And these processes require time. They require adjustments, because even if you have the best consultants like McKinsey and other big fours, it's still a process that the organizations are currently in. But what I saw is mainly you always have a board with experts coming from different departments where you do your escalation when it comes in terms of AI. So you have a governmental body within the organization focusing on specific innovative topics. Usually it's not only AI, right? And then you have your focus groups who will work and implement and develop solutions. But anyhow, even having that, even having the process or implementing that, I see that there are often not the right people in these panels and boards. I see that topics like artificial intelligence, because people don't understand the technology behind that, they don't grasp the entire possible harmful outcome, they place people either because they volunteered or because they have a degree that might be applicable for that, or computer science, for example. Sometimes it's even people who are quite young who just graduated because AI has a youthful face to that. And yeah, I think like at the end to like this is what it takes, and the idea is right and the structure is right. But I think now what I experience is that the organizations they have to adjust the roles to adjust the people.
Yeah, I hear you on that. I think about an organization like Salesforce, for instance, that does have an AI, an ethics board, for instance, and they kind of like, those are external experts that they pay to be part of their ethics board. And that's been reasonably successful, I would say, compared to other organizations, which I'm going to name, but they've maybe had more kind of like ground up employee initiatives that when workloads have got too much, then they've had to abandon them, right? So within, I think if we're thinking about ethical implementation, kind of what you're talking about is investment, right? You need the skills, the right skills in these places, and you need to have kind of like some sort of something that goes beyond goodwill, I suppose, in these larger organizations.
Yes, because we have now the ethical AI implementation, but what the organizations are mainly focusing is the second part, like AI implementation. They want to have it implemented, and the first part is always,
But the vision is there, right? So that's still kind of like quite a positive message that if you work in a larger organization, maybe those are some of the things that you might look out for as being quite good things to have. I'd like to move on to Arta. You're in a more of a SME. Like, would you like to speak a little bit about this question? Like, what kind of organizational structures work for smaller companies?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll also give a bit of context why I'm here. So I'm director of data engineering in the company Open Principles Club. It provides one membership you can work out in different locations, and what we build, my team is building, is consumer AI products that we can do some recommendations to the users. And I think one of the challenges for me is that it's also a lot of, we are being like a medium-sized company, right, that initiatives around the AI and ethics are coming from our own, let's say, initiatives, right, that we have to then later discuss, with the management, and sell sort of like the idea, like do a lot more data literacy. So that is particularly on the level of myself, other data leaders, who then communicate with the management, who then tell them that this is important, right? Like generally data literacy, but also the ethics and AI like development. And so a lot of the initiatives are starting from the bottom up, right? So I do need to carve up my time and like do a lot of research in that sphere, which I think, there's definitely a lot of like convincing that need to happen. And that's something that I think we're driving on like a different level as well.
Yeah, that's a really great insight, actually. And Hamza, because you also work at a smaller organization, can you just describe, Arta talked about persuasion. What does that structurally look like when you're in a smaller organization, do you think, compared to a larger organization? And also introduce yourself.
So I'm a sustainable AI engineer. So my main focus is onto minimizing the environmental impact of AI, which is an important part of ethical AI because only a few are benefiting of AI, while the impact is going to be on everyone in the global south, here, everywhere. And I fell into sustainable AI during my master's studies. When I joined the company, it was just an AI engineering job. But I was looking into an impact, and then I showed it to my manager, and I was like, hey, what about the sustainability of all of this? Let's try to optimize it. My manager was directly on board. The AI department was 100% on board. We then had to sit down with the business team, with the CEO. They were all on board, but we don't have an ethics team. We do have diversity chief officers and so, but when you talk to them, they are good at diversity, inclusion and all, but they lack the AI knowledge to help into realizing ethical AI implementation along the whole chain. And so I have to, like, now I have a sustainability team, but we do have to do all that work by ourselves. So when we also started with sustainability, the ethics came with it. So now when we work, it's in our brains, in the back of our brains, that we need to check everything, if everything is ethical, with our understanding of what is ethical, at least. And so we have to take time off our coding. We do have to do all the research on ethical AI, how to implement, to minimize bias, and so all by ourselves. But we have the freedom to do so. So no matter how much time I take on that, I've never received anything from the upper ups that I shouldn't be doing that, but they are always happy with the results that I show, with the reports that I present on the CO2 footprint of AI, the data curation, ethical data curation, and so on.
What's interesting listening to you both speak is the fact that it seems like the culture was already oriented around these more ethical areas. What advice would you give to someone who maybe felt that their organization wasn't oriented in that way and to help with structure? Or is it find a better company?
Maybe I can say, I think it also starts with people, well, at a different level, right? So we try to promote a lot of ownership within the engineers themselves. I mean, since we say don't have resources for dedicated team that does particularly maybe some labeling of the, making sure that the AI is adequate, right? But then everybody's responsibility is a shared responsibility. It's a big ownership as well. There's, I think we also try to implement some frameworks. We have some AI policy that's circulating within an organization, what you cannot do as well. It's adapting some of the best practices. I think then even if you're a small organization, it is important to source the information from the industry and still adapt without waiting, let's say, whenever that comes, back at you. So I think it's reflecting continuously and also having that concept of shared responsibility that helps to promote the higher literacy within the organization.
Yeah, so I would actually agree. For me, I think you can just start by yourself. Like, the change starts also with us. Just start doing it. I think, and then try to take it to the higher ups with the hope that it works. Else you can quit and find a better job. There are a lot of companies that, hopefully, there are a lot of companies that want to implement ethics. But also, the problem is that, well, companies think in terms of profit. And for me, what I face as problems is not my company with the sustainability, but trying to sell it to customers as to implement sustainable AI approaches, to use sustainable AI models. That's where it's more complicated.
What's really interesting about hearing you both speak is kind of like thinking about ownership. And I think that like there's probably many different grades of like management in this room, whether or not you're a CEO, a mid-manager, or kind of like someone who's a new graduate. I also think listening, I was kind of joking about you could just leave. But ultimately as well, like we've spoken quite a lot about the talent gap that exists within engineers right now. Companies are oriented towards profit. If that then turns into something which, if their hiring policy becomes way too expensive as a result of them not doing this kind of thing, that's also kind of like a form of implementation. So just, thinking about how you might be empowered in various different ways, I think is something that I've definitely got from hearing you speak just now. Jordan, though, educator, I'd really love to hear about kind of skills and like what kind of like skills you think are missing from organizations at the moment in order to implement AI ethically. That's already been spoken about. Maria also already spoke about whether or not the right people are in these positions. So yeah, can you speak a little bit about the skills that are required?
Yeah, and I'm here under three hats. So I'm here under the hat of Professor of AI Ethics and Policy. I'm also here as a co-founder of the AI Alt Lab, where we're trying to help governments and organizations implement AI ethical frameworks with values. And then I'm also here kind of, it's both personally and professionally, as a scholar of Indigenous studies and as a Taino scholar. So to be fully transparent, my values and the values that I try to push and I try to be open with are Indigenous values. And so even in my class with my students, I have this entire values-based approach. So I teach business students. These are MBA level students who are taking a semester-long course. Some are in executive courses. And I start with them like, look, it has ethics in the title, but ethics is just this tool. It's one more tool in this toolkit to help get things done. What ethics usually does is it helps empower your values. If you don't know what your values are, you're just making things happen, and they might be good, might be bad. You don't know. And so the first step is getting people aware of what it is that they value. And then once you know what you value, then you can start setting in place what the shoulds should be. What are my values? Then you can set your goals, and then you can start moving towards that. So the way I move through it is like, yeah, we have the students reflect on their personal values, and then we talk about the core key stuff that people talk about when they talk about AI. So we talk about transparency, we talk about privacy, sustainability, all these things. But then we ask why. Why are these things valuable? What are their roots? What are their histories? And then once we know kind of how these things came to be, then we can again start pointing out, okay, well, now that we know how this got here, now that we know why transparency is important, because it reveals the hidden kind of dark manipulative things. Okay, well, then we know, oh, well, we don't want to be manipulated. So what are the tools that we need to put in place to stop the manipulation from happening? So I think before we can even get to the skills gap, we have this like values gap or this personal understanding gap that we got to overcome. And so that's what I'm trying to do with my students.
I think that is really, really profound actually, because a lot of the ethical methodologies that I definitely employ start with values. It starts with your own internal interrogation as to what you want your values to be, and then you go out to like stakeholders and see what stakeholder values are and kind of like play that back. I think within that though, like there's certain skills, right? Like there's social science skills. Like if you're doing stakeholder mapping, that in itself is a methodological skill. Like interviewing is a methodological skill. Philosophy, there is a philosophical method. It's not just kind of like, people like to think of it as like sitting on an armchair, but there is the philosophical method, you know? So I think also it's an appreciation of like, these are various different skills that you might need if you want to be a professional ethicist. And then equally, any sort of like business person needs to be able to like identify like when something might be amiss, the sorts of things that Erica was talking about in her presentation yesterday as well.
Yeah, and it's interesting. I mean, this is they have one class in their entire business program that's around like AI ethics, and like ethics could be something that's in every one of their classes, right? So it's like any topic, any conversation, any strain of interest would have kind of the own particular skills that you need to apply in those scenarios. But I think you're right, and to even get to the stakeholder mapping, I think it also comes back to like you can learn what the values are of the people you're dealing with, and that's great. But it's also like, I guess, personal reflection would be one of the skills,
Right.
like self-reflection, reciprocity, like trying to figure out where you are so that when you're engaging with stakeholders, you see kind of, your biases, your values, and how those might be in conflict with the people that you're talking with and dealing with.
Did you want to come in on that, Maria? Oh, right. Yeah, no, please just come in on what you were going to say about the skills.
No, because I fully agree with you, and I think we'll be following also the question that you will ask later. But this ethical implementation and reflection, there is currently a rising body of knowledge in a combination between business informatics and philosophy, where scholars are now discussing including ethics in requirements engineering. So doing the interviews while you do the requirements engineering, asking users or your key stakeholders, what ethical concerns do you have? Because we are now implementing artificial intelligence, you are my stakeholder, I would like AI matching your needs. But, and this is quite new, because ethics and requirements engineering was, I wouldn't say never a thing, but at least not in the real world. But now we have like this idea implementing it into this step.
Do you know what's really cool is that I'm thinking about the jobs that AI can supposedly do, which is very much in this analytical logic space. And all of the skills that we're talking about when it comes to ethics are uniquely like human emotional cases, which AI is going to struggle to replicate. I've often thought that actually if AI does automate quite a lot of jobs, then more humans should be moving more into these ethical roles anyway. So it's something which could kind of like build new economies, build new industries. And it's also something that we're not necessarily focusing on as businesses at the moment. And yet that seems like a major opportunity. Yeah, I think one of the reasons why I'm keen to ask this question, though, is because quite often ethics is seen as something which isn't skilled, right? And even just in this conversation, talking about various different like methods that you might need, and also then how diverse the team might have to be in terms of, I like bringing in historians. I remember working with a literary scholar who had mapped out, we were looking at attention studies, and she had mapped out how attention had been focused on in recent literature, which had then carved into the narrative around attention. That was incredibly helpful for us, thinking about how we'd design the product and design things moving forward. And yet you wouldn't think that an English literature degree would be of any use at all, right? So yeah, cool.
Actually, I want to jump in. It's interesting, both Hamza and Akhtar. I'm wondering, because this question of whether ethics need to be required or made happen or kind of top down, I always get a little nervous about that, because I think when people are forced to do ethics, then it's not coming from a place where they actually care about it, and they end up just doing this neutral thing. But for both of you, it seems almost like this bottom-up approach. And so I'm curious, reflecting on maybe your own personal values that may have shaped why you care about ethics in the places that you work.
For me, it came just I was born in Tunisia, raised in Tunisia, came here to do my studies. I've always seen the disparity between the global South and the West. I've always experienced discrimination either in Tunisia or here, they're everywhere. And so it's always shaped my personality, and then noticing also the impact of every industry on the environment. So it started that way. It just started, okay, I want to do something to help Earth, not especially humanity. It didn't start with me thinking, okay, I'm going to help humanity. It started, I want to save the planet. If humanity is then, gone, but that's it. And then it also started then bringing up ethics into the play. And then when I work on use cases, it depends on obviously the ethics of a use case is different from another use case. Ethical data curation varies from 5G indoor 5G localization to a pedestrian detection use case, where there you have to have a diverse data set. And so that's how it all started. I think, my values shape the way I do, but I'm noticing it in people who joined my team all came with that in mind. And when I hired working students, I wasn't looking for working students that were in the sustainability field. But when they started looking into this, into the project, they really went into it, and they tried to then find other aspects to care about.
Yeah, I think for me, the ethical AI is so the values that we sing about when we sing about the ethical AI is also a representation of how we treat people. Because in a way, the AI is being used by people, right? So it's in a way, for me, it's a reflection of how do I want to, that AI being used applicable to everyone else as well. And I think it's the product of me being living in a democratic open society, right? I mean, I really want to make sure that the basic principles are respected. And but there's also, of course, still is the gap of what I know and what I don't know. And as we've been talking about the skills, right? I mean, to have a bit more comprehensive, let's say educational programs as well. Talking about the ethics in AI, so we might be missing out on something, because at this point, this is mostly from my experience and common sense. What is ethical, right? But this is again is the result of the society that I let's say grew up in or operate in as well, and there might be cases that I don't really know and I don't act on still. So I think it's really important to have that formal education and thinking about the principles in a more detail.
Great question, Jordan. Okay, I'd quite like to talk about some specific implementation of some specific topics, right? We've spoken about transparency quite a lot today, actually. But then there's bias, there's all sorts of cases that have been brought against AI in the media. Hamza, could you talk a little bit about, your sustainability, little sustainability project? I didn't mean that, but can you just talk a little bit about the genuine implementation that you've gone through in order to, think more about sustainable AI?
Yeah. So the first concept of green AI, of sustainable AI, is transparency. You need to be aware of your impact to then try and minimize it. If you don't know how much you're emitting or how much energy you're using or water you're using, you won't know where are the bottlenecks and how to deal with that. So what I did was develop a framework that in real time measures the energy consumption of the GPU, CPU, memory, and on a server level of any AI workload. And at the end of that AI workload, or AI ops workload, let's say, because in data processing, I use that framework. In training, in optimization, in deployment, I use that framework. And so it links it to a CO2 footprint on the office where I work, where my server is, because I don't use the cloud, because the cloud does a lot of greenwashing. Always question what big cloud providers tell you, please. And it helps me also see where the bottlenecks are and help to mitigate those and reduce my consumption. And because I do a lot of research into minimization of the impact. But to achieve that framework now works, the struggles I went through with the energy provider, demanding like to know exactly how many grams of CO2 equivalent are emitted per kilowatt hour and so on. It was a lot of emails, a lot of okay, I'm gonna change the energy. We're gonna change the energy provider. Our offices are in the building, and I went to all the other companies, and I was like, please send them emails as well, which they did, thankfully. And now, like, I receive like quite regularly updates on how much gram CO2 equivalent per kilowatt hour I emit. And this framework I use in every use case. And then I deliver that report to customers or research partners also. But that is something I can do on every use cases. For the rest, it's always use case dependent.
So what I've heard from this example is that measurement is absolutely key. And I think that there's a lot of companies that might say they're sustainable but don't necessarily have that measurement in place. So like that's a really cool project, and yeah, it's really cool. The second thing I think is super interesting is that your title is Sustainable AI Engineer, and what you've described is not coding. It's kind of collective action, right? It's kind of like, yeah, it's like transformation. It's being an inspiring leader, bringing people on board. But you weren't coding as part of that necessarily. You were like gathering data.
Yeah, but the framework is, it's code that works, that runs in parallel to the AI workload. But yeah, this example, yes, it's also gathering a lot of data to create this framework. But in other use cases where, for example, we always think that big data is the answer to everything. It's not. A lot of data might hurt your models. Smart, good data is the answer. And so I also developed a framework that removes data from the data set. And it helped me, for example, in a use case, reduce the training time from 7 days to 1 day. And I've reached better accuracy, better recall, better precision, and so on. And so it's depends on what you're working at, but coding is very much present in my life, but obviously in my work life. But obviously, there is a lot surrounding it as well in terms of research, in terms of activism, in terms of trying to call out big companies.
But also what you've described is you created a massive efficiency, which is also aligns with like business goals. So like that also is quite a good use case if you want to kind of like try and convince a manager about this, then that's an amazing use case.
That's
right?
what we show the customers.
Yeah, amazing. Okay. Arthur, because that was about sustainability, I think you've got some really great examples around bias and other factors.
Well, yeah, I can share like a second personal story about the bias and the company-wide as well. So the personal one, I completely hate the voice assistants because I never get my voice right. If you use Siri, and I use it often when I do, in CarPlay, whatever, and it doesn't really get my instruction because I'm not a native English speaker, right? So I feel that I'm, being, judged, perhaps. But I mean, more so, of course, you can improve this by, having like data sets like trained, for instance, for the speakers who don't have that as, as a language, as the mother tongue. And from the company perspective, as we develop the models, like the data science models to serve our consumers, we're a consumer-facing company. So, for instance, one of the things that we recently have seen was we're developing a model that can help us predict churn because we're a subscription-based company. And one of the features was included at the beginning was gender. So it did give like really high accuracy, let's say, to say if a particular user will churn, let's say, in the next 3 months. But we decided to remove this, of course, because that would include the gender bias, after all. And but for us, I mean, there's also a reverse side of that coin, as we offer our users to work out and do different type of sports. For instance, we don't want to recommend, let's say, prenatal yoga classes to men, or particular gyms that are only women to male as well. So we per se did not include that in the algorithm, but we still need to do some filtering on top as the post-processing step to make sure that it's still equally distributed and everybody gets the relevancy that they need and the good user experience with our product.
Yeah, it's like a really simple kind of solution. We actually have a case study like that as well, where we're very conscious that there's these systemic kind of big data sets that we don't want to necessarily contribute any bias to. So we just make sure that we're not feeding those kind of like data sets and audiences into those big systems, which I think is quite kind of a simple fix. Doesn't necessarily have all the answers, but I think it's really nice. This actually says ethical AI implementation. When we were looking at this originally, it also had AI safety in there. And I know, Hamza, you want to talk about safety standards.
Yes. So safety standards have always, exist everywhere in every industry. For example, ISO 26262 in the automotive field that ensures that everything works as it is intended and doesn't cause any harm. But now you have this industry, which is AI, that is coming into all of the other industries and disrupting everything. So all of these standards are losing relevance because they work in a deterministic way. AI is non-deterministic in most cases, and it's one thing certain with AI is that at every point of AI systems, you have uncertainty. You have uncertainty in ethical data curation. You have uncertainty in data quality. You have uncertainty in the training. The models are arrogantly overconfident in their inference. Uncertainty in the sensors you're going to use at deployment stage, and so on. And so we need community-driven standards, safety standards, like the ISO I mentioned, like the ones in the aerospace industry, whatever. You can put as many regulations as you want. Without community-driven standards, we won't work there. And a lot of things are easy to do. In neural networks, you can include uncertainty estimation that will tell your model if it's that, and then your model will tell you it's a data problem. So all your data you're giving me is crap, or it's a model problem, and that is where you feed it more data. But more data doesn't mean just gather all data and feed it to it. We need good data, not big data, please.
Cool. What a great soundbite. We need good data, not big data. Maria, I'd like to talk to you a little bit. I mean, throughout all of this, we kind of have been offering case studies almost for persuasion of kind of managers, execs, sometimes clients, customers. Have you got any tips around how you might persuade these stakeholder groups that ethical AI implementation matters and requires investment?
Yes, thank you for the question. It's a tricky one because there is no one answer fits all. Because if we talk about ethics, especially ethics in AI, ethics for people outside of this bubble, it's something not tangible, something eternal, something that requires lots of thinking and spare time. And as I mentioned, they just want to implement the AI. And I think if you go to the higher management and if you try to persuade them, and we had this discussion before, right? A CEO life in a company is usually not 10 years, it's 3 years, 4 years, and they move on. So you need to show use cases that are tangible for them. Maybe, yes, use ethics as the word, but not try to put it on top, but rather, wrap it in nice KPIs, nice return on investment, make it juicy for them, and do your work on ethics in the background, right, with people who are actually then doing the implementation. Because the managers, they think about the organization, but they don't think about every single individual and every single harm that might be done. They think of organization as an entity, right, as the legal entity with its own legal personhood and a reputation that they can also put then on their CVs. So you need to persuade them, or you need to have a nice sales pitch with KPIs. And maybe on the note that Jordan has mentioned as well on ethics, I think it's a nice use case for philosophers, because I really believe that philosophers make great prompt engineers, because prompt engineering is natural language, right? And it is similar to thought experiments that we do as philosophers, right?
You're saying I should change a job?
Might be. But I also think that organization needs to start hiring these people, And if we have more prompt engineers with such degrees, then I also think the step towards ethical AI implementation is easier.
That's such an interesting point. I was also going to say on the organizational change thing, I think that executives are really influenced by money, but I also, in my experience, have learned they are influenced more if they like you. Like on a fundamental level, like if they like you and they kind of want to impress you a bit, like, you know, just think about any of your friends, like they want to do favors for you as well. And I think that, I mean, we were recently interviewing for an ethics role, and one of our questions was, you know, you've got a blocker, how do you navigate around that? And actually it's around finding your allies as well. You know, it's not just about the ROI, it's about kind of like bringing your friends in, making sure that you're attending those social occasions. And yeah, and I bet that that's probably true. Yeah, everyone's nodding. Yeah, like you're not going to get an ethical profile program through if you're a dick, like fundamentally. Thank you. Thank you. Okay, so I know that we're coming up to time. I'm pleased, it feels like the room is awake, which is really nice. I think the final question I'd like to put to everyone in the panel, I'll start with you, Jordan, is like, this is a really unusual conference, right? We've been talking a lot about responsibility, we've been talking a lot about ethics, you know, it's got an incredible diversity of professions who are here. What advice would you give people to amplify these messages and to not look back in 2 weeks and go, oh, that was nice, but I haven't seen any change? Like, do you have any advice as to how you would amplify what you've learned in this conference in the next few days, weeks, months, years?
Oh, man.
You knew the question was coming.
Yeah, I didn't prepare. I think what I really appreciate about events like this, I mean, we call it networking, but like that's like the most neutral, mundane, like term. But it's like if we're going to amplify each other's voices, if we care about this space, then like connecting with one another, following each other's work, championing like when things are happening. I think that's part of the mandate here. It's like I think everyone who's here cares about this in some way. We've had enough interactions with one another that even if we disagree vehemently on some things, we can still support one another, cheer one another on, pay attention to how folks' works are developing, and then form community. I think community is a really, really important value, and I think the stronger community we form, the more powerful we'll be and the more impact we'll have. So
what I've heard is go for a coffee with at least one other person who you've met here. Okay, great. Hamza, same question. We're taking a look at the time.
Yeah, so I totally agree with what Jordan said. For me, it's like we are in this bubble of ethics here, and every time I go out of these bubbles that I live in, like in different communities, and so I'm like, okay, I'm always shocked by everything that I face, and so amplifying each other's voices is important, but also trying. We talked about organizations trying to be sneaky around those organizations. It's nice. I have problems selling sustainability to customers as the main point, but then when I show them all the money they can save, they're like, oh, we love sustainability. We are sustainability champions. Let's do it. And so it's okay to do that, but obviously talking around you about that, about this, about ethical AI, about the implications of AI with everyone who you know might not understand it is very, very important and has more impact than you might realize.
And what I've heard from you, Maria, and also Natalia in another conversation is translation, right? Like, how do you translate what we're talking about here into terminology that like other people might understand? Arthur, how would you amplify?
Well, I think we definitely should be the multiplicators of change. Yeah, I mean, it definitely starts with us bottom up, right? But at the same time, the organization, I mean, they have, different levels of the data maturity and ultimately want to be at the really top, right? If you imagine the kind of curve of them, organization understanding what the data literacy is generally and, ethics and AI. And I think like talking with your leaders, right? Having a, champion on your side, for instance, who can advocate is that for that ethics as well on the management higher level as well. I mean, it's extremely important, but at the same time, spreading a bit that knowledge. And I think, yeah, we basically the advocates of change, and I think the change starts with us, right? And then definitely including this pieces of that, ethics within our frameworks, roadmaps, and such. That's definitely the plan that I will, tackle in the next coming weeks.
Kind of reading between the lines here, I'm hearing make a plan. right? That's kind of what I've heard from what you've said is like, yes, you need to kind of like have these conversations, but without having those frameworks, without kind of like thinking about the hiring managers and stuff, you need to have a plan as to how to get there. And actually that's something that everyone can do in the next few weeks is think, what kind of like milestones might I want to achieve? Maria.
Yeah, for me, it's a big success because I've been to academic conferences in my academic bubble. I've also been in business conferences in a business bubble, and that's the first time that I actually can combine both my research and my work. And I see that, like a couple of years ago, it wouldn't be possible to have this community with different types of people, especially coming from the business point of view. And I think I agree with Jordan, networking is a key here, because I am a freelancer. I have sometimes projects where I need to have allies with different skills than mine, but with the same mindset that I have. And if we connect with each other and if we help each other to build this future, again, unfortunately, sometimes doing the salami tactic and bringing, like doing everything in the background and selling just the juicy KPI on top. But I think we can make it happen.
So weirdly, we are talking about love, aren't we? I'm really proud of us for managing to get all of that into 50 minutes. Yeah, I think we're going to leave it there. Thank you so much. I really do hope that this conference makes a difference, and I might need to run and catch a flight now. But yeah, thank you to everyone, and I'm going to pass back to Lena for the next thing, the next talk, the next panel. Thank you, everyone. Thank you.